Hi everyone, welcome back to chapter 5 part 1 exercise. Now we are going to solve question 2. It's same as before, we need to solve using quick sort. However, we need to use rightmost item as a pivot. So from this area here, the rightmost item is 25. It's quite similar with leftmost item, but yeah, let me solve it together. Here I already copy the array here. So the leftmost item is a pivot. So we assign S and I. So S is -1 and I is 0. I mean this is index. Alright. So now we need to compare I with P. Position I, value I with P. So 15 is less than pivot. Right? So it's less than 25. When it's less than 25, S need to increase by 1. So S need to increase by 1. Then this is new S. And then S need to swap with I. Since it's the same position, we don't change it. Then we move on. Before we move on, we need to add I with 1, increase I by 1. So this is the new position for I. Then we need to compare between 22 and the pivot. So 22 is less than 25. When 22 less than 25, S need to increase by 1. So this is new position for S. Then we need to swap between S and I. It is same position, right? So the same index, so no change. Then we need to increase I by 1. So this is new I. So we need to compare between I and P. So 13 is less than 25. So when less than, so we need to increase S by 1. Then the new S is here. Then we need to swap between S and I. Since it's the same position, we just move on to the next because no change. So I plus 1, then this is new position for I. So we are comparing I with P, pivot. So 27 is more than 25. Since it's more than, not less than, so we don't have to increase S or swapping. So we just move on. I plus 1, so this is I. We are comparing I with P. So 12 less than 25. When it less than, we need to increase S by 1. So the new S is here. Then we need to swap between S and I. So we need to swap between S and I. So we will get here 12, 27, 10, 20, and lastly pivot here, 25. So the new S is here, and the new I is next increased by 1. So this new I. So we need to compare between I and pivot. So 10 is less than 25. When it's less than 25, we need to increase S by 1. So the new S is here. Then we need to swap between S and I. Then we need to increase I by 1. So this is new I. So we will get here 10, 27, and 20, 25. So we will get, we need to compare between I and 25 and the pivot. So 20 is less than 25. When 20 is less than 25, we need to increase S by 1. So this is the new S. And we compare, we swap I and S. So we will get, the final one is not the final yet, but we will get 10, 20, 27, and 25. Alright. So we get I here, S here. Next, lastly, we need to, this already end, right? So we don't have I anymore. Because lastly is an index kan, we don't have to push anymore. So we need to swap between P and S plus 1. Not S, but S plus 1. So S plus 1 is 27, this position. So we need to swap between these two. So lastly, we will get, we just rewrite here. So this is 27 and this is 25, 20, 10, 12, 13, 22, and 15. Right. So here 27 and 25 we can freeze it because 25 is a pivot, previous pivot, and 27 is the only number at the left side, at the right side. Alright, so we need to do it again. Okay, we need to do it again. We need to choose the pivot. So the pivot is the rightmost. So the rightmost is 20. So pivot is 20. Then S start with -1 and I start with 0. Index. This is the index tau. Don't confuse. This is index. This is value at the index. Okay. Array value. Alright. First we need to compare the value at index 0 with pivot. So 15 is less than 20. When it less than 20, S need to plus 1. Then the new position is here. And we need to swap between I and S. Since it is the same position, we don't have to change. Then we need to add I by 1. Then here the new position for I. So we need to compare I with the pivot. 22 is more than 20. When it's more than 20, we don't have to increase S by 1. We don't have to swap it. So we just move on to the next. We just add I with 1 again. So the new position I. So we need to compare I with the pivot. 13 is less than 20. So when it less than 20, we need to add S by 1. So here the new position of S. Then we need to swap between S and I and increase I by 1. So here the I new I, this is S. So we will get 15. So when we swap 13 here and 22 here, 12 here, 10, and the pivot. So we will get here, this is S, this is I, right? Alright, so we need to compare I with the pivot again. So 12 is less than 20. When it less than 20, we need to increase, we need to increase S by 1. Then here the S, we need to swap S and I. And then we will get 15, 13, 12, 22, 10, and the pivot 20. We also need to increase I by 1. So next I is here. So we have to compare I with pivot. So 10 is less than pivot, less than 20. When it less than 20, S need to increase by 1. So here the S, and we need to swap between S and I. So we will get 15, 13, 12, 10, 22, and 20. Now S is here and I is here and the pivot is here. So we already achieved at the end. So we need to swap between pivot and S plus 1. S plus 1. So here S. So we need to swap pivot and S plus 1. Right. So the final, not the final yet. 15, 13, 12, 10, 20, 22, 25, 27. Right, we already logged 25, 27. We are going to log 20 since it's a pivot and 22 since it's the left one and the right one alone. So we need to do it again. 10 is a pivot because it is the rightmost. Then start with S less -1 and I index is 0. So we need to compare I with pivot. 15 is more than P. Since it's more than P, we just move on to the next. So this is the next I. We need to compare 13 with 10. It says 13 is more than 10. When 30 is more than 10, we just move on to the next. 12 is more than 10. So it's the end. So we don't have to do anything like increasing S. So we just need to swap between P and S plus 1. So S plus 1 is here. So we need to swap between these two. So we will get 15 here. I mean, we already swapped. Okay, 10 here, 13 here, 12, and 15, 20, 22, 25, 27. So we already lock here, lock here, lock here, lock here, lock here. Alright, next we need to do it again. 12 is a pivot, and S is -1, and I is here. So we need to compare. 10 with the pivot is less than 12. When S less than 12, S increase, so S is here. We need to swap S and I. It's the same index, so no change. Then we move on to the next. This I, we need to compare 13 with 12. So 13 is more than 12. So don't have to do anything. We just move on to the next. This is, no. This already pivot. So we don't have to increase anymore. So we need to swap between 12 pivot with S plus 1. So S plus 1 is 13. S plus 1 is 13. So we need to swap between these two. Alright. So we will get 10, 12, and 13. We can just lock it here, 13. And then, same as before, but I don't think we have to do it anymore because this already solved, right? Then, so when we rewrite again, in the ascending order, 10, 12, 13, 15, 20, 22, 25, and 27. Right? So we solved this already.